Hello. Yes, you're looking at an eye. But the reason why we have this eye model is we're actually going to be looking at these bones of the bony orbit and the nasal cavity right here. And I really like this model because it highlights a lot of the bones of the bony orbit and the nasal cavity. And you get a sense for where they really are. The skulls really don't do a good job, and then they show you the free bone and you're like, what the heck is that bone? So like the other rotating models, if you grab it and spin it, it'll go left and right. You could just play it and get dizzy. It'll spin round and round. You could advance it with the arrows, and this enlarges it. And we'll be using the enlarged view. Lastly, the green button goes to the bones of the orbit. Now this is the model we're looking at right here. It's the medial view. And then this is another model that is missing the eye and it is missing the lacrimal sac, but it does a good job of showing the fossa here. So I'm going to be referring back to this picture as we go over the landmarks of the bones found here. So on this model, this is what we are looking at right here. So it has the frontal bone removed. The eyeball is sitting right here. It's covering the orbital plate of the ethmoid bone. The lacrimal bone is right here. We have the maxilla. I'm questionable if it has part of the zygomatic bone or not on it. So this is all the maxilla. And we can see the nasal bones right there. So that is how we are actually starting. So it's remove this frontal bone. We have the ethmoid bone. We have some of the sphenoid bone right here. We have most of the maxillary bone. And we have the nasal bones right there. So we're going to be looking at this. Then when we turn it, we're going to be looking inside the nasal cavity right here. So here's our eye. We've taken the frontal bone off right here. This is actually the frontal sinus right there. This is the maxillary bone. That is the zygomatic bone. It's a little bit short, I think, now looking at the real skull. There's the lacrimal bone right here. And what we're missing is the orbital plate. There's a bunch of fat on it, but if we click here, there's the orbital plate of the ethmoid bone. So the ethmoid bone makes up the medial wall of the orbit. And we have the lacrimal bone right there. You have a fossa called the lacrimal fossa. And tears basically are going to run down that fossa and into the nasal cavity. So there's a tube going in the nasal cavity. Here's the zygomatic bone. And again, this is a slightly different orbital model. And here is the nasal bone. And again, frontal bone. And there is the frontal sinus on this view of this. So then we have the sphenoid bone in the back. Remember I pointed out the sphenoid bone. This is the optic canal. The optic nerve is going through it. And that's the foramen rotundum right there. Another nerve is going through that one. So, now we're here for the ethmoid bone. So I'm going to rotate. Here's the nasal bone. There again is the frontal sinus. The ethmoid bone has air cells that form its sinus. So this is the frontal sinus. And this is the perpendicular plate. This is forming the septum, or the superior part of the septum of your nasal cavity. This bone right here is the vomer. So this is the perpendicular plate. And this right here is the cristagalli. That is going to anchor the connective tissue holding the brain in place right there. So this is the ethmoid bone here. That is the perpendicular plate. Unfortunately, we can't see the nasal concha on this model. Now, as I'm spinning it to the posterior, here's the sphenoid bone. There's the sphenoid sinus. And right here, we have the cerebriform plate, and you can't really see it. I didn't do a good job of focusing here. But there's little tiny foramina. That's the plural of foramen. And what happens is you have a nerve sitting right here. It's called the olfactory nerve. And its terminus is right here. And it has little tiny bipolar cells that are sticking through here into the nasal cavity so you can smell. So again, this is the ethmoid bone. That is the cristagalli, cerebriform plate. This is the sphenoid bone. So you can see the optic canal right there. This is part of the superior orbital fissure. They took most of it out. And if I spin a little bit, that is the foramen rotundum. So if I look at the medial view, here it is. There is the vomer. Here's the perpendicular plate. Here is the cerebriform plate. there is the cristagalli. Here's the sphenoid sinus. There's the vomer. And look, the palatine bone is sticking a little bit up into the nasal cavity. The palatine bone really gets around. It should be sticking up right there also, but it's not on this model. So here's that other model that we're looking at the lateral view for. So here again is the ethmoid bone. You can see the olfactory foramina right there now. And these are the nasal concha. So the perpendicular plate was right here, covering over everything. There's the sphenoid bone. There's the optic canal. So these are called concha. They're called nasal concha. This is the superior nasal concha. This is the middle nasal concha. The inferior nasal concha is another bone that would be sitting right here. So these are the nasal concha, and their job is to slow airflow down. So spin around the model, look at the different landmarks on the ethmoid bone. Look at the other bones. It's a really good model for finding all the bones, like lacrimal, nasal, all these little tiny bones, and the foramen on the sphenoid bone. And here's one more view of that other one. This one you could see the cerebriform plate a little bit better and the olfactory foramina. So spin it around to take a look at it.